What do you do if your child gets caught in a cycle of self-destructive or even dangerous behavior? Some desperate parents are having their children abducted, taken against their will to a behavior modification program.
The reality is torture of children.
I thought I was going to get help, and it just made things so much worse.
Woke up at like 2 in the morning by 2 strangers, and they took me out of my home.
You think you're being kidnapped.
You don't know where you're going. It is scary. And then you're in the program and you don't leave for a really long time.
Upon the first few minutes of being in that building, you know that you are not in a safe place.
We can't talk to our parents. We can't call for help. We can't run for help.
I was abused. I was raped. I was starved to death.
They break you in ways that are really impossible to fully explain.
All our parents had kind of fallen into this sort of cult.
Palms up, palms down, palms together, palms apart.
I wasn't doing drugs, but then I learned very quickly that I really had to confess to doing all of this in order to go home.
There was no intention of helping any of these kids.
They're taking American children across state lines and international borders. If the world knew about it, like, they would be outraged.
This is trafficking.
It's not only still happening, it's arguably much more prevalent.
I just wanted someone to help me, and no one did.
How could you stand by and let this happen to children?
Imagine being woken up in the middle of the night and strangers taking you from your own bed. As you try to fight back, you're restrained and taken away. While pleading for help, you see something impossible to understand. Your family standing by, watching it all happen. But this is not a dream, and the nightmare is just beginning. That is the last time that you're allowed to speak to your family or to anyone for months to come. It's an experience that countless children have been through, including many right here in the DMV. Fox 5 looking into the industry that promises to fix troubled teens. But at what price? This is Stolen Innocence. The troubled teen industry. It's an umbrella term for the privately run youth residential facilities that claim to cure young people who struggle with everything from substance abuse to emotional problems.
In terms of the troubled teen, I think we see the stereotype that we're most frightened about as parents. This is somebody who's maybe breaking the law. This is somebody with whom our relationship has broken down, so they lie. It's a whole spectrum from all the way on the more normal end, teens may be making some impulsive choices here and there that are not healthy, all the way to the end where this is somebody that really needs intervention.
In recent years, a spotlight has come on these facilities over concerns about child abuse, corruption, and even death. Fox 5 spoke to several victims in D.C., Maryland, and Virginia who attended these schools, and the stories and experiences they shared are horrific.
Honestly, it's such a hard experience to try to describe.
They tried so hard to let us or to limit us or to tell us that we weren't ever going to be good enough for anything.
You're the reason why you're here, and you need to own up to it.
It's just too much for anybody to have to go through.
Those are just some of the survivors who attended the same disciplinary boarding institution between 2002 and 2005. The academy at Ivy Ridge in upstate New York permanently closed in 2009. The women's stories came to light in a new documentary series, The Program: Cons, Cults, and Kidnapping. The filmmaker Catherine Kubler returned to the academy with her former classmates to unpack the disturbing mental and physical abuse that happened there.
Across the country, traveled everywhere, interviewing survivors, staff members, experts, anyone who would talk to me about it, to try to, explain the abuse and how the methodology of how these programs work.
The academy at Ivy Ridge is just one of many youth treatment facilities around the world where parents were encouraged to send their kids as a way to stop bad behavior. Many of these institutions fall under the Worldwide Association of Specialty Programs in Schools, otherwise known as WASP.
In Mexico, Jamaica, Samoa, the Czech Republic, but that's just WASP, that's just one program.
Founded by Robert Litchfield in 1998, WASP opened numerous programs that disguised themselves as boarding schools for troubled teens.
How Robert Litchfield got away with running an international child abuse ring for decades and has faced no prison time is shameful.
One facility abroad was Casa by the Sea, which was shut down by the Mexican government in 2004.
I just happened to be sent to, Mexico was the cheapest one out of them, so that was the better option. The federales came in one day. You have like this militarized, police coming in, and they have automatic weapons and their handguns, and the staff took off. They told us that this place was being shut down, so we were excited. And then you find out you're getting sent to another program. So they all migrated to Ivy Ridge.
Many of the survivors we spoke to attended these schools decades ago. But still, thousands of kids are being sent to these facilities each and every year.
My experience was hell. I was treated as though anything and everything I said had to be treated with suspicion or doubt, that I was manipulative, that I was attention-seeking.
So why did they all end up here?
I was sent away by my father because he wasn't very happy that I was, like most people, I was kind of just growing into like an independent person, and I was understanding more things about myself, and I eventually came out as gay.
My younger brother, who was 16 months old at the time, he was in a near drowning accident. It was really a traumatic event. And I was a little bit more of a rebellious teenager, so doing things like maybe sneaking out of the house, pretty typical teenage stuff. My mom's dealing with all of those things, and I think that she really needed me kind of off her plate.
I was in a lot of trouble. I was a heroin addict. It was the first time that I ever asked for help or trusted anybody to help me because I wasn't gonna make it past my 18th birthday.
All of us experienced some major shift in our early childhood or major trauma that ended up really catalyzing a lot of the behavior that we ended up taking on as adolescents, mainly because it wasn't seen as a family problem, it was seen as a child problem.
Parents believed these institutions would help their children. Instead, they were abused and traumatized.
The transporting process is part of my recurring nightmares from the program.
Woke up at like 2 in the morning by 2 strangers, and they took me out of my home.
You're in the most vulnerable part of your house and in your existence, right?
You're sitting in the back of the car, you don't know where you're going, it is scary.
And they drove me saying that we were going to an airport.
You're asking questions like, what's happening? Like, help me. And my parents were like, we're sending you away. So in my head, it was very clear very early on that my parents had me like kidnapped for hire.
Once they arrived at these facilities, the dark realities quickly set in.
When I got there, I was withdrawing from heroin, so they put me in R&R, which is basically like solitary, and I got to sit in there for a week just detoxing. With no help, no medications.
I was forced to do a strip search, and the person who did my strip search, it was a female nurse and a male staff member. And I was 15 years old, and that was the first time that I'd ever been naked in front of the opposite sex.
Once the intake process was over, students were expected to, quote, work the program.
What was working the program like? Following their rules, being their robot, not making any facial features, not looking out the window, just literally following every rule in their stupid rule book that they had.
Those are just some of the countless rules teens had to follow, and any slip-up would result in a demerit or a correction, which could jeopardize your level in the program.
The whole goal every single day is just this, just try to go unnoticed and don't lose points. My water bottle was sitting on the floor and it was on its side. I remember the dorm mom who was in charge of her family that day, she told me I needed to pick up a correction. So no matter how hard you try, that is life in the program. It's like a game that is completely rigged.
If students shared the truth of what was happening behind closed doors, they'd get corrections for that as well.
My whole body looks at me, she's like, you're not allowed to talk. I'm like, what? She's like, you can't talk. And that was it.
You're not allowed to contact any of your friends. You had very limited, strict communication with your families. You could only write a letter once a week to your parents. That would be read and censored. You had to earn the privilege to have a 15-minute phone call with your parents once a month. That was monitored.
But what students could say were detailed confessions they had to share with their parents.
So you write these confession letters and you kind of admit to like, here's all the bad things I was doing, and they tell you it's not good enough. And then you have to rewrite it, and then they send it to your parents. And I recall my mom writing back to me and saying, I already knew all of this. And it's like they're also being told on their side, your kid is a liar and they're a manipulator and this is what they're going to say.
I wasn't doing drugs, but then I learned very quickly that I really had to confess to doing all of this in order to go home. So then I started writing home about drugs.
My 14-page confession letter that is most lies.
Parents expected that during the day their children were getting a high-quality education and taking part in therapy sessions. But survivors say they weren't allowed to speak to each other, couldn't look out the window, and there was a complete lack of privacy in the bathroom or while they slept.
People in jail can talk. I couldn't talk. People in jail could go to the bathroom when they wanted to. I couldn't.
The best part of the day was brushing your teeth, even though even that was so stressful because everything was timed, fighting over sinks like dogs.
The only thing I looked forward to was what we were going to eat or going to sleep, because at least in my dreams, I was away from there.
I threw up from all the anxiety, and I was instructed to clear my plate. So I ate my own vomit.
They had cow liver and Brussels sprouts, but having to eat it, throw it up, and then being forced to eat my throw up was probably one of the worst experiences.
Some were even victims of sexual harassment and assault.
I was being abused by a family member, and I ended up getting pregnant by the age 15, and my son died. While I was there, everyone would have a nickname, and me, because I had a child at such a young age, they would call me Nympho.
When you said they would call you a nympho, was that the staff? That was the nickname?
Yeah, the staff member. I didn't even quite understand it. And I remember saying like, well, why do you call me that? And they're like, well, what 15-year-old has sex? I can answer that now as an adult and say someone who's been abused.
I was groomed by a woman that I unfortunately just spent a lot of one-on-one time with.
It's really like she knew that there was a desperation that I had for a mother figure. It was like motherly touch, right? Touching my hair, or putting like her hand on my knee, like to comfort me. And she would take me to different houses, essentially to talk amazing about the program, but then also would be sexually abusing me in those homes. And then she came down to my parents' house with me, and it happened in my parents' house.
These circumstances, unfortunately, are not unique.
An additional 27 girls came forward about being sexually abused by her. It's had such devastating impacts on my life in so many different ways that I'm still trying to figure out.
And then there were seminars.
Seminars were also bad memories.
The seminar concept themselves was a derivative of the cult Scientology. These were all targeted at willing adults who were trying to find an answer for their lives, right? Whereas we were kids, we were adolescents, and we were forced into this against our will.
You have to do something to get out of there. So when you're doing all of these crazy things, you're having to make some of this stuff up or over-dramatize it. The worst thing that happened to me as a kid was my brother drowning. So in these seminars, I remember actually having a moment where I was like, thank God, I have that horrible experience because I can use that.
They really had it out for people of color, for gay people. They had me put me in a red dress. And I had to dance around the room by myself to this song, Lady in Red. And if you know that song and the words of that song, it is everything opposite of who I am as a person. And I had to celebrate that. And to this day, I can't hear that song.
In one of the seminars, they do something called the lifeboat exercise. Like you're on a cruise ship and you're everything's great, and you can feel the breeze in your hair, and then the boat crashes, and they make this crashing noise, and now everyone is dying around you, but then you have everybody stand in a circle. They had you take your name tags off. One by one, they have you go around in the inside of this circle to all of these kids, boys and girls. If you couldn't remember their name, you have to look in their eye and say, to tell every kid, you're not important enough for me to know your name, so you die. You die, you die, you die over and over and over again. So at the same time, every other kid that's in there is telling you that over and over and over again, you die. So needless to say, that was something that I repressed for a really long time, and I struggled a lot with thoughts of suicide all throughout my adult life.
The shocking everyday abuse eventually became routine, and students learned to disassociate to deal with it all.
You're subjecting children to watch other children be humiliated or restrained, and we're acting normal about it. We're going about our day like it's nothing.
Since there is no central database on these programs, it's impossible to say exactly how many schools like Ivy Ridge remain open to this day, and just how many children are still being tormented.
Some big man at the top is getting money, and he's getting away with it.
Still ahead, the efforts to regulate the troubled teen industry and how the system failed them.
I don't think these places should exist, but as long as they do exist, there's got to be some sort of standard of care for when you have children in your care.
Plus, how these survivors are coping with their trauma when Stolen Innocence returns.
When there's emotional abuse, physical abuse, this is trauma, plain and simple.
There's a very, very high rate of suicides of kids who went through these programs.
I was in and out of hospitals for trying to kill myself, for overdosing.
I've got a lot of trauma. I've been diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder.
Even to this day, home is not a safe place because people can come in at any time and take you.
I mean, I'm 37 years old, and I'm having a problem with something that happened to me at 17.
It doesn't ever go away. I mean, I'm still recuperating, I'm still healing.
The trauma is something we will live with forever.
Victims of the troubled teen industry say they endure horrific abuse while inside of the walls of these facilities.
It was hell. You did everything you could in your mind to escape, and you would plot ways to even try to escape or kill yourself.
But the trauma doesn't always end once they leave. Victims of this industry and experts alike say survivors are at a higher risk for drug overdoses, suicide, and other mental health issues.
So when I started the documentary, I believe the list of other kids that were in the program with us that have died from either suicide or overdose was at about 40, and I know that's grown since then.
When we think about suicidal behavior and suicidal ideation, a lot of times it's hopelessness. This sense of things aren't going to get better that can really be a driver. A lot of times these abusive programs actually push that very notion. You've screwed up, you've wrecked your parents' lives, you caused nothing but pain for other people. And so this is going to put people at really high risk for suicide.
Trauma leads to more trauma, we hear that a lot. And then when you wind up in some of these situations, post-traumatic event, you're at higher risk too for staying in them because you normalize it.
These facilities even use common therapy techniques against children.
The psychological torture, which is what I am currently trying to recover from. Diagnosed with PTSD right now, going through trauma therapy, honestly re-traumatizing myself right now to undo what they did to me.
Not only were you told it was your fault, you also had to articulate that back to them, and then you take that with you into adulthood. And it can put you in some really, really dangerous places.
Having heavy levels of abuse and heavy levels of neglect can cause you to have personality disorders, which many of us have. Because of that, some of us have gone to the hospital and had to stay there and get medication to help us adjust to life.
While the psychological effects of the facilities are still prevalent for many, effects from the physical abuse can also be hard to shed.
I actually ended up having eating disorders when I got out. So I got to the point where it's like, I don't want to eat something unless it means something to me. It's like, I never want to eat something that that I'm not going to enjoy, because when you were there, you were forced to eat what you were given.
If you want to talk about long-term effects, like even to this day, I am really bad at sleeping alone. I realize just how much the fear of being taken still lives with me.
I was in and out of hospitals for trying to kill myself, for overdosing. This has been, the last 2 months have been the clearest that I've had since leaving the program, and that's because of the trauma therapy that I'm going through, and it's extensive.
It's seemingly small things throughout my day where I need to go use the bathroom and I sit on the toilet and tell myself, you can sit here and pee as long as you need to, because we were so conditioned.
I'm traumatized. I was abused. I was raped. I was starved to death. I was isolated, and you go back to life having to act like none of that happened.
The abuse can leave victims trying to make sense of their past experiences.
When I got out of the program, I had this weird, I don't want to call it fascination, but I was watching a lot of POW movies, reading things where people are taken and isolated somewhere, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was doing that because I was trying to relate.
I was in my adolescence where my frontal lobe was being developed for adulthood, and I was not able to process any of that pain. So now as an adult where my brain is formed, I now have to process the pain of a 15-year-old girl. And it's ugly. It's very ugly.
I mean, I'm 37 years old, and I'm having a problem with something that happened to me at 17 that happened 20 years ago. You can't emphasize enough what it did to you and how it changes your brain. But if you talk about, oh, I got hit in the head and cracked my skull open, you can see that, you can visualize it, you can feel that. But you can't with this, at least for me.
Up next, many parents found this industry while desperate to get help for their kids. But with little to no regulation over these programs, parents get conned and children get harmed. And for some, trust can be nearly impossible to recover once it's been broken.
This whole thing was a hoax. This was not ever meant to help any of us.
There was no way to be able to call our parents to be like, come get us at all.
It's very similar to what cults do.
We found talking points that the program would use to keep our parents engaged and keep them writing the next check.
I know they don't understand. I can't really expect them to.
For a lot of families to see the havoc and just the devastation.
They're desperate. They're scared in their own homes. They're by unpredictable behavior. They're frightened about what their kid is doing.
After hearing the allegations of abuse that victims share, you may be wondering, why would a parent send their child to one of these facilities?
When we see teens that are troubled, a lot of times parents feel very, very desperate. And I think what happens sometimes is that parents are very vulnerable to being manipulated by some of these camps, some of these programs that do not work and that at worst actually cause serious harm.
We can't talk to our parents, we can't call for help, we can't run for help, we can't cry for help. You know, if we do, then we get in trouble for it.
Since students weren't allowed to tell the truth about the program, many parents were left in the dark.
My parents never saw the program. They didn't go up there. They didn't know what it even looked like other than these, fancy, glossy brochures.
I literally thought my parents knew. I thought they knew what was going on, but apparently they didn't.
When a teen is starting to be told, well, what goes on here stays here, we don't want you to talk about your progress with someone else, that's fundamentally concerning because it goes against the idea of how the parents are going to be a team in the solution.
They prey on the fears of parents, which are very real fears at times, that they'll lose their kid to drugs, they're worried their kid will die, and these programs really manipulate those fears to keep these parents cutting checks.
They had like regional support groups. And then some parents who are also interested in maybe sending away their kid go there to hear how much these kids have changed.
You think like, there's no way my parents are gonna keep me here for my birthday. And then your birthday comes and goes, and you know, and then it's Thanksgiving, and then it's Christmas, and eventually you realize like, okay, you realize pretty quickly that your parents are committed to however long it takes, because the program has gotten that commitment from your parents before you're even sent there.
I had told, you know, my mom and my family rep, like, I'm leaving when I'm 18, and they have to give you what they call an exit plan. My exit plan was, I think, $50 and a bus ticket to the next homeless shelter.
That sounded better to you than being in Ivy Ridge.
Ivy Ridge made me believe that if I would have left when I turned 18, I was going to be homeless and my parents didn't want me.
Schools like Ivy Ridge painted a picture to parents of a regular high school, offering activities like horseback riding, dancing, hiking, and swimming. But survivors say those pictures were all PR stunts, and many times they weren't even allowed outside.
When I saw how they were advertising it to parents, I just knew that nobody was ever going to believe anything we said. So like this gazebo, for example, this was in the center of the compound, whatever you want to call it. We never like went in there. They actually built this tunnel to connect the dorms to the building that we spent our days in. They didn't even trust us to go outside.
Parents were also told that their kids would be able to get their high school diplomas, which turned out to be fake. Ivy Ridge was not licensed, certified, or registered with the Department of Education, and those degrees were not accepted by colleges.
I put all this work in, and now this school wasn't even authorized to hand out these diplomas. This diploma looks 100% real. You know, it looks like a legit diploma.
A multi-page handbook also outlined what parents could expect as their child moved through the program.
Denial phase. This phase is typified by statements like, I can't believe you did this to me. I don't belong here. I'm not learning anything. There are kids here that have much worse problems than mine. And then there's the guilt trip phase, the anger phase, that you'll wish you had never done this to me. Then there's the negotiation phase. If you bring me home, I promise there won't be any more problems. Acceptance phase. During this phase, the student finally realizes and accepts that he or she is here until he or she makes the changes that are necessary. It is the only stage that the school will begin to be effective for them. Just a lot of like manipulation.
Dr. Bonyer says it's important to know the difference between normal teen emotions and when it's time to seek help.
It's really hard for a typical parent to be able to assess this because teens are different than kids. It could be, oh my goodness, my teen has changed. They used to be sweet and affectionate and extroverted and outgoing, and now they're sullen and they're prickly. At what point is that a sign of depression? That's when we start to be more concerned.
Some survivors have gotten apologies from their loved ones.
You know, I sent my mom the link to the Netflix documentary because I wanted her to watch it. And she did apologize. She apologized for sending me there, and I absolutely felt her apology.
In the documentary, I talked about how my parents didn't believe me and how they still believe the program over their own daughter. And I am really relieved to say that that's no longer the case anymore.
While others say their parents are less sympathetic.
I don't have a good relationship with my dad. I haven't talked to him in 5 years. Last time I talked to him, it was like, this happened so long ago, you know, you need to get over it.
The tricky thing is that there's one part of you that is so thankful and so happy to finally have that child-parent relationship that you've been so desperate to have, even in your 30s. It's very weird. But then there's another part of you that remembers being abandoned, that remembers being sent away, you know, by two strangers, that remembers the times that they chose to leave me there. I'm remaining cautiously optimistic about our future and the work that we're doing together, because I do care for them very much.
Some children do need outside help, but before sending a child away, Dr. Bonnier strongly encourages parents to do their research.
Any type of program really needs to have very specific treatment. It's got to be science-backed. It's got to be empirically validated. Things that seem strange, things that say, hey, we know it's our way or the highway. We're not going to communicate with parents, or we have a staff that doesn't seem to have a mental health background. Those are all red flags.
With such predatory tactics, it's not surprising that family relationships can be left fractured. But what about those that come later in life? Coming up, a look at the problems some victims face building and keeping those healthy connections and relationships.
When you wake up and you're already emotionally exhausted, how much more can you give to your family?
She has ups, and then she has incredible crippling downs, and you cannot know when they're going to happen.
You really have a scenario where they don't have a template for what it feels like to be in a healthy relationship.
And then you take that with you into adulthood, and it can put you in some really, really dangerous places.
This is my marriage. This isn't just, a good friend of mine, right? She is my best friend.
It's not just a burden to him, it's a burden to my children. My children shouldn't have to see my trauma.
The spouses of the survivors are really having to survive themselves.
Survivors of the troubled teen industry often carry trauma with them for the rest of their lives. As we learned, a survivor's relationship with their parents can be severely impacted, but it doesn't end there. The lasting damage also affects romantic relationships.
We're really talking about a situation that oftentimes can bring helplessness and horror and can further make it very difficult to trust and build attachments with healthy people that wouldn't be abusive.
If you're in a place like that, it really distorts your expectations of relationships and what healthy relationships look like, all of those things. So it's really setting you up for some serious challenges.
A part of me, whether I like it or not, subconsciously I'll always have trust issues. What are your intentions? Are your intentions to try to control me?
So I kind of knew pretty early on that she was suffering from some mental health type issues. The family called it bipolar. They had their ideas as to what was going on with her, and she would share with me some things.
Jeremy Serrato has been married to his wife Maggie for 10 years.
It's generally discussed from a perspective of a survivor, and I have a lot of compassion for survivors, automatically, because I know what they're going through. I would like people to understand that it really is not just the survivor themselves, but it is the people that love the survivors, the people that are working with the survivors. It's the spouses, the parents.
I feel like a burden to him. There's been times in disassociation that I told him it would just be better off for the family if I was gone. You guys wouldn't have to deal with this anymore. It's not just a burden to him, it's a burden to my children. My children shouldn't have to see my trauma.
Together, the couple is raising 3 boys.
It's so hard being a mother with trauma. When I go through depression, it's like the things that go through your mind, thinking man, I should be with my kids. I should be spending time with them. But it's like the depression got so hard at one point that I couldn't even get out of bed. When you wake up and you're already emotionally exhausted, how much more can you give to your family? All of that feedback of constantly having to tell each other, what do you need to work on? What do you need to work on? It really, it stays with you.
With the release of the program, those who love these survivors most are finally getting a better understanding of the trauma left behind.
My family had downplayed it so much that even I would downplay it. Oh yeah, I went to boarding school, and I would say things like we weren't allowed to talk, but my husband, he said when he first heard about it, he was like, yeah, right, it's probably an over-exaggeration, But when he saw the program, he says it opened up a new doorway for him because he was able to see this is why she's the way she is.
Her nightmares would always be her back in the boarding school. So I knew that it was something that was deeply inside of her. And she would wake up with panic attacks until I watched the program and I saw the place, I saw what they were saying. Everything they described was just exactly what she would attempt to describe to me. And, after I saw that, after I watched that, I mean, my whole mind was just opened up to a new version of Maggie that I didn't know. And it just made so much sense that she is the way that she is. It makes sense why she's triggered, why she can't do common things like mix food, and why she can't deal with people raising their voice and trying to understand the whole situation with what she's going through in her mind and these moments, these experiences, these time periods where she will just break and she'll just be completely out of touch with humanity.
Building and maintaining relationships is a common struggle for survivors of this industry.
Trust has been so fractured, just the idea of trusting someone new can be so difficult. So you might see people getting into romantic relationships where they don't talk about this stuff, or they're very suspicious and guarded, or maybe they are avoidant of relationships. They also might not recognize a healthy relationship because maybe they haven't actually been in one, so they don't know what it looks like and they wouldn't know how to seek it out.
The trauma doesn't always stop at the victim. Without realizing it, the next generation can be affected too.
I have a really hard time being the disciplinary to my children, and I have a hard time seeing my children being disciplined. Anytime I think a rule is redundant, it can cause conflict between my husband and I. If I say, well, why? I'll question him. Why he's making a rule, and it could make complete sense, but to me it's like I feel like I have to constantly protect my children as if I'm protecting myself.
With dealing with our own children, she will be flashbacked back right into the program, and I'll be sitting there like, I can't raise my voice in any way. I can't show myself as mean in any way, and that's a challenge to do, right? You have to be perfect. It is one of the best ways to describe it. You have to act perfect and be perfect, because that is how much she was traumatized and how much she was programmed there.
It's very understandably hard for them to trust, and it can affect them for the rest of their lives if they don't get support for it, because it's kind of a once bitten, twice shy situation, right? It's a situation where why would I trust again when the last time that someone was supposedly helping me, they actually were abusive.
The aftermath of that abuse and its effects on survivors' mental health can have lasting impacts on the entire family.
It's gotten so bad that I've had to just up and immediately just quit jobs to go back home and deal with her, mental health. I've had to ask her to go to the hospital multiple times. She'll have an incredible panic attack where she will not be able to work anymore. She'll just be unable to work anymore.
For a lot of people, there's already been what we would consider disrupted attachment. So you've already got the basis of that. And then if you're putting them in a scenario where other adults are, instead of caring for them and caring about them, where other adults are being further abusive, then you really have a scenario where they don't have a template for what it feels like to be in a healthy relationship.
But when it comes to his marriage, Jeremy is determined to be the partner that Maggie needs.
I made a promise to be honest and to keep my mind focused on her and to remain pure in my heart. And there have been moments where, because of the struggle, because of the disassociation, she'll up and leave the family high and dry. And I'll just be sitting there, pleading, Lord, bring her back.
Some folks that goes through these programs, they really internalize it as, well, I was bad, so I deserved it. And they're going to carry that into their next relationship and be more likely to be treated poorly and tolerate it, depending.
Have I been tempted to think, man, this isn't worth it? Yeah, of course. Of course. I think that is a natural part of dealing with, marriage, but also a marriage where a spouse has the level of trauma and the level of mental health challenges that she has. I've had to reinvent my whole way of life to keep that connection and to keep that love going.
For now, Jeremy's focused on patching the holes left behind in Maggie's heart.
And that baggage doesn't just disappear. You can't pretend it's not there. But what gives me hope is that God is good, and He's going to help us through this. He has been, and I believe He still will continue all the way through.
Still ahead, survivors take to Capitol Hill to shine a light on the abuse still happening at youth treatment facilities across the country. Why they're pushing for bipartisan support from lawmakers and encouraging them to act now.
How are you?
When the priority is profit, not proper treatment, it's the patients who are suffering there.
This troubled teen industry often veers into abuse and profit rather than assistance.
There was a lot of money being made off of the abuse of these children.
There's no regulation whatsoever. There's not been any meaningful change.
There are a number of folks who do not want this industry regulated.
Why are we regulating an industry that just shouldn't exist altogether?
The report references the use of both chemical and physical restraints on children and youth.
Finally, we have proof, and it's in the congressional record now, of kids that have died unnecessarily in these programs.
That is the story I've heard many times. How could you all as legislators let this happen?
So basically, all of us are essentially just going to bum rush the House and hand out as many as possible. I'm speaking for the child who's in the program right now.
Actually, this bill will save lives.
I don't have to have been through this or have a family member or have any kind of relation to it to actually care.
The troubled teen industry has been raising eyebrows for decades. In 2007, the U.S. Government Accountability Office found thousands of allegations of abuse at the hands of these types of programs, along with misleading marketing towards parents. But even with more attention, these facilities remain open. In June of 2024, a group of survivors gathered on Capitol Hill to attend a Senate finance hearing and talk to lawmakers about efforts to further protect minors in this industry.
If you really want to go after these places, you need to follow the money. So that's what I did. And that seemed to be the key to unlocking this whole industry, is that there was a lot of money being made off of the abuse of these children.
A Senate Finance Committee opened an investigation to address the allegations of abuse. The report, 2 years in the making, calls attention to funding of these facilities.
The 4 companies that were the focus of this investigation were United Health Services, Vivant, Acadia, and Devereaux. They are the biggest providers of these kind of residential treatment facilities, and it does cover a lot of different types of programs because they're getting a lot of government contracts through foster care and juvenile justice and disability. They're warehousing these children but not giving them the treatment that they need.
According to Breaking Code Silence, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of the troubled teen industry, about 23 billion tax dollars go to this unregulated industry every year.
The findings in this report are beyond appalling. If it happened in any context, it would be disturbing and appalling. But when you consider that these facilities are using taxpayer dollars.
When you look at the troubled teen industry historically, in the 80s there was this big boom with the war on drugs and this fear that we're going to lose children to drugs. And so a lot of private paying families were paying money to send their kids to these places to undergo intense behavior modification programs. Now, shortly after I got out of the program in around 2008, there was the financial crisis, the housing crisis. And so a lot of families couldn't afford these kind of places anymore. So the industry pivoted a bit and started getting government contracts to help subsidize their income. So then they started getting contracts with foster care and juvenile justice and disability and working with education consultants who get kickbacks to recommend kids to go to these programs for specialized education.
Now you've got insurance companies that will also, there's coverage for sending kids to these places through Medicaid and other insurances.
As the largest health insurer for youth and a major revenue source for the providers at issue in the committee's investigation, Medicaid has a crucial role. in facility oversight and accountability.
In addition to the Senate report's findings, there's also a separate piece of legislation, the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act, a bipartisan bill being pushed by a group of senators, including Jeff Merkley of Oregon.
This bill is really about collecting information to understand the challenge. Where are these institutions? What do they look like? What is all the data regarding the children who are sent there? What do they cost? How long are they there? How are they treated?
The bill would create a task force that would oversee the regulation of youth treatment facilities.
That provides a foundation for states or potentially for the federal government to enact reforms in terms of regulation. But this first step is to say, let's at least get a full understanding of what's going on.
They would also be required to publish a report every 2 years with policy recommendations for reform.
There's no oversight. There is no FDA for behavioral health. So anyone can say, I've invented a new therapy, send us your kids, and they can do whatever they want. And unfortunately, whatever they want is usually some very abusive, exploitative stuff to these children.
The Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act has gained recent attention thanks to a celebrity with close ties to the subject.
Well, certainly Paris Hilton gets a lot of credit for bringing her story to bear, the Provo Canyon School, where she was sent.
From the ages of 16 to 18, I was sent to 4 troubled teen industry facilities. Each one was more horrific than the last. I witnessed and experienced sexual abuse from adult staff, as well as endured verbal and emotional abuse daily.
Hilton described the horrors that this very bill addresses.
Can you imagine your teenage daughter being watched in the shower by male staff? What if you thought your kid was receiving treatment but was actually locked in a solitary confinement cell? What would you do if you found out that your child was being restrained by multiple staff members? How would you feel if you found out later that your child was being injected with sedatives that made them numb for days at a time?
She has come to the Hill multiple times. I'm sure she's absolutely frustrated that the process of legislation moves so slowly. I'm frustrated. I think my Senate colleagues on both sides of the aisle are frustrated. We want to get this done.
I'm never going to get my childhood back, but some of these children are losing their futures too.
When it comes to getting this legislation passed, there are a few holdups.
Well, there are a number of folks who do not want this industry regulated. They do not even want a light to be shined on it to collect data. They're like, this is private for profit. It's buyer beware. The parents should investigate and understand what's going on. Well, how are parents supposed to get any possible understanding of what's going on behind those locked doors? Without oversight, you end up with abuse.
Despite the high price tag associated with these facilities, research shows the financial burdens of trauma will stick with these survivors for decades to come.
When I ran my numbers, it was about $76,000 that my dad had spent in that 15 months, and that was more than what Harvard would have been.
It made me feel really bad knowing that they were spending all that money on me. But then to know that that money wasn't going to you. Exactly. They were spending $4.25 a day on our stay in Ivy Ridge, from food to the 2-minute showers that we got.
Parents are willing to spend a lot of money to help their children. But if that results in injuries that require additional assistance later in life, then it's not just that the original funds were unhelpful. It's you've now created a lifetime of problems for your child, your beloved child that you wanted to help.
When it comes to fixing the problem, though, Merkley says this is just the beginning.
This bill doesn't go far enough by itself. This bill provides all of the information that will help lead to either states or the federal government acting more directly to provide a direct oversight.
That's a start. And then you have some people like myself who think, well, why are we regulating an industry that just shouldn't exist altogether? So I don't think these places should exist, but as long as they do exist, there's got to be some sort of standard of care for when you have children in your care.
And when it comes to getting others on board, survivors are doing what they can to get the word out.
There's a bill being introduced called the Stop Institutional Child Abuse Act, which is this bill. But the one pager here is about the report that was just released by the Senate Finance Committee talking about their findings.
In order to get this bill passed, Senator Merkley has a message to all citizens.
Every successful effort is accelerated when you have an outside group of citizens sharing their stories, pressing the case, and an inside group of senators and House members advocating. So it's a combination that is most effective. And so it's very valuable to have citizens. I encourage citizens to contact my team to share their stories, either their own personal experience in these facilities or as parents, what happened when they sent their child to a facility.
I want everybody to know we're just getting started. We'll do everything we can to help.
Still to come, what does justice look like for these survivors? Plus, the bond that can't be broken. How their lived experiences are now bringing them together.
It's hard to explain to people what I went through and grasping that. I mean, it's hard for me to grasp it.
Listen to the kids, you know, and that's a hill I really will die on, is like, listen to the kids.
Being able to talk about it breaks the shame. It is empowering to ultimately break your silence.
The activism in the survivor community is taking a multitude of different forms, and all of them are needed.
I just want to take them down. They all need to go down. They need to be locked away forever for what they did to children.
Survivors say that after so much mental torture, they're hopeful that their stories will finally be heard.
I was not believed at all. It was a joke.
Kids don't lie about this type of stuff, not to the degree that we're coming out here with the same stories, the same experiences. What do we have to gain?
And when it comes to getting justice,
I'd like to see this industry abolished. It is a false promise, preying on desperate families and parents, promising something that cannot be delivered.
There's no regulation whatsoever. There's not been any meaningful change, even with a lot of this coming to light. There really hasn't been, so we've got a long way to go, for sure.
I want these places shut down. I don't want any parents to be manipulated to think that this is going to help them.
Justice would be having these people behind bars. And we're going to get you.
The ripple effects last for a really long time. The key here is recognizing that there is help and that there is strength in numbers, and that talking about this can destigmatize the idea of someone else talking about it next.
Life is really, really messy and really challenging for a lot of people. And I think our collective mentality has changed quite a bit over the past few decades about the concept of like, oh, well, when I was a kid, and we kind of make fun of that, but it does, things that happen to you really can change how you navigate life.
and to the people who tormented them and caused them so much pain, they have this message.
Just shame on you. And how could you stand by and let this happen to children?
You didn't break me and you can't break me. Like, I'm standing strong. If anything, it made me stronger.
I'm just building my life back up, and I'm trying to be more open with my identity that was, silenced from me for a long time, and just reconnecting with all that time I lost and just trying to understand more about my life, and finally starting to feel happy again and like letting myself feel everything that I wasn't able to when I was gone.
This group of survivors, they are the strongest people you'll ever meet. The strongest people with the most conviction, the most heart, the most love for each other. It doesn't matter where we came from, what our background is, who we like, who we don't like, it doesn't matter. The second one of us falls, somebody is there to pick us up.
The only good thing that came out of it was my siblings, my Ivy Ridge siblings, and I really look at them as my siblings. I love them. I hold them very near and dear to my heart.
There's something very special about Ivy Ridge kids. The way that we have reconnected with one another, the way that our bonds are, the way that we show up for one another is different.
They tried so hard to limit us or to tell us that we weren't ever going to be good enough for anything. And yet, These survivors are the most incredible people you will ever meet in your entire life. The most selfless people. And will fight for everything that we have, for the justice, for the children of the future, of today, and of the past, and of the ones that we've lost.
With no confirmation about how many boarding facilities are open or just how many children are affected, the troubled teen industry operates today with no restraints. If you feel you have a child who might need behavioral intervention, you're encouraged to talk to the experts. Do your research and ask plenty of questions. Thanks for watching Stolen Innocence. I'm Jacqueline Matter.